I suppose we could say, well, that's fine, everything is rosy, so we might as well adjourn for the next 2 or 3 days. You know, why are we having a spring statement? And there's many issues that are out there to be dealt with. And, you know, when I hear the government self-congratulating each other, I suppose you're reminded of, you're nearly thinking that that they're over in government buildings, and they saw the autumn statement by George Osborne in light of, ahead of the spring budget. And they had a kind of a moment where they said, well, haha, that's a great idea. Why don't we have a spring statement in advance of an autumn budget? And we have 3 days of dull business given over to this self-congratulatory nonsense. And what is sickening about it, to be perfectly honest about it, is in the very, very difficult days of 2008, 9 and 10, and the now current Taoiseach sitting there on the Labour benches ranting and raving about this country is now banjexed, and the opposition party, the main opposition party at the time, Fine Gael, were now government, opposing every idea and telling us that there was no salvation at all for this country. And they didn't give one canly cue except to crush the government at the time, irrespective of what the consequences were for the nation. And I particularly remember sitting in the chamber when John Burton was talking about this country being banjexed, and I was looking at the absolute, you know, the theatre performance that she put on. And then when I look at the statements that were given over the last couple of days about how great things are, I was saying, like, Jesus, it's not 400 years or 40 years or even 10 years, it's only 4 years. And when the plan was being outlined by the late Brian Moynihan in relation to the 4-year plan, you know, it was scorned upon that it was not possible to turn this around so fast. And I particularly upset about having the Dáil turned over for 3 days of this nonsense when we are awaiting a number of bills. In the case of the Children First bill, it was the Minister for Children before last that took the second stage of that bill, and there's no sign of it moving. As for the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Bill 2013, it's nearly 18 months since it was referred to the committee and is still waiting. And on top of this, the hour given over to topical issues have been abandoned for today and yesterday, just in case any backbench TD, either government or opposition, could bring issues that affect them or their communities to the floor of Dáil. And there are many issues that I will try and deal with that we could be bringing to the floor of Dáil. And the issues that I would like to deal with are the issues that are affecting communities the length and the breadth of the country, but in particular my own constituency of Cork North West. And you were moving the writ there for the Carlow-Kilkenny by-election, and there was some congratulatory notes in relation to Phil Hogan, who has now gone on to the Agricultural Commissioner position in the European Union, and I wish him the best of luck there. But one of the issues that I would take fierce objection to was the way the leader funding and the decision of the putting people first document in relation to leader funding, and the way it has decimated communities all across the country. And I've had reason over the last 18 months to travel the length and the breadth of the country. And if you see these community groups, these local community groups, local action groups, since the McSharry proposals and since the European Union brought in the funding for the bottom-up approach, many communities have benefited enormously from it. And we have seen them decimated. In my own county, in Cork, you know, funding has been cut by 70%. 70% the funding has been cut in relation to these communities. And they have been doing excellent work. Voluntary people in every single community. Every single community, and if you look at the, you know, any assessment of how that, what work that has been done there, you can see that the benefits to rural communities. This is an awful legacy, and irrespective of the budgetary parameters, this was a blatant cut in the Common Agricultural Policy that came in, which was a self-congratulatory document that was chaired by the current Minister for Agriculture at European level, and it was a cut on rural communities and rural funding. And whilst people might say the methodology and all the rest of it, but when all this work is being done, There are local contractors, there are local architects, there are local builders, there are local people that are benefiting from the work that's been done and from the funding that's been done on it. Now, Minister, I think that it was a retrograde step, and I think that it should be looked at in a major way. You mentioned in your speech there, Minister, the disability sector, and it's one sector that I have a particular graw for right through from the time that I came into this House for a whole variety of reasons. And the disability sector has been taking a hammering, and there are issues. There was an all-party committee set up by members of the Houses of the Oireachtas some 2 or 3 months ago, and that there were meetings to be held once every 6 weeks to report on how things were. Well, we haven't seen sight nor sound of that group since. There has been no second meeting, never mind first meeting, and if I was a cynic, I would say that it was an attempt by the government parties to make sure that the silence of the House was bought on it. I think that it is time that we reconvene that meeting urgently, because there is an issue in relation to Section 38 and Section 39 and how the funding, how the groups are being funded. Because in one section you have that the debts or the deficits of that community group is being paid for by the state, and in another instance it has to be rolled into borrowings by that group. Now, there is a line trotted out, and from my time as a backbencher, you'll get that line from time to time that there's massive savings being made. I've looked at the way some of the groups have been funded and the way they manage their groups, and I speak in particular about St. Joseph's Foundation in Charleville in County Cork, who are doing extraordinary work in terms of the communities they serve in nearly, I suppose, in 5 of the constituencies: Cork North West, Cork East, Limerick, both of the Limericks and part of North Kerry, and they service a massive area, and they're doing Trojan work. And I mean, I understand, and I have met with the families, I have met with the staff, I've met with the service users, and all along from, we'll say, 1997, I have watched closely how the services have increased and how they have been able to give further services to families, and now I have seen the difficulties that they have in relation to cutting them back. But the one thing that I will not accept at any level is that there is some way in any of these groups, any of these voluntary groups that have been set up predominantly in the late 60s and the early 70s, that there is some extra fat there that can be creamed to try and make sure that the funding is going to the disability sector. Because I know these people have been running these organisations on shoestrings, and any bit of state funding that they bring in, they look at how far they can take it, how far they can stretch that, what's the best value for money that they can take in it. And it is unbecoming of anybody in this House to insinuate in any way, shape or form that there is somehow money to be taken there that is not going to the disability sector, because every penny that's going into these groups, and I just speak about St. Joseph's in particular because they have been doing massive work in relation to it. Dr. O'Donnell, whose son Kieran is a TD here, Dr. O'Donnell was a visionary in relation to the way he set that up. And further on, Eamon McCarthy and Conor Coonhan and those that are managing it are doing massive work in relation to it. And I think that we have to be absolutely honest with ourselves as a society. These groups, some of them are being treated differently, some of them are being treated under Section 38 or Section 39, depending on which one they are. They have the deficit written off, and others have to have to pile on the pressure in relation to the deficit. And even those groups are being treated at the moment unfairly in this country, because some groups that would have to roll over the deficit are having their deficits written off by the HSE, depending on the part of the country they're coming for and depending on the clout of political representations they're getting. And I think that it is high time that we had to deal with these, because these people are doing work that is invaluable to society, invaluable to families, invaluable to people, and have continued to do so. In relation to broadband, I think one of the greatest divides that is in rural communities at the moment is the broadband issue. And I had a debate here with the Minister, Alex White, yesterday, and we had it at committee stage, at committee when we were doing the estimates earlier this year, and last year as well, and before the last European and local elections. There was massive fanfare by the then Minister Pat Rabbitte that there was a new national broadband scheme after being announced, and it was going to be the salvation of the entire country. That was in April, probably a little over 12 months ago, before the local and European elections, and we had now a scheme that was going to sort out the issues. Well, what the Minister and the Government forgot to tell us at that time was that they would have to apply to the European Union for state aid approval so that it would not be in contravention of the state aid's rules, and that document has not yet gone to the European Union and is unlikely to go to the European Union until very, very late in 2015. No doubt there would be fanfare about it before the election. But it will be a full year and a half at least before that document, and the Minister did say that they're having progress reports once a month in relation to it from the Department. Whatever the progress reports are, we have had various maps put out there saying that there will be broadband in 2015, 2016, 2017. It is a fundamental issue. And we have to accept that unless we bring a fibre optic cable to every house and every community in this country, we have the launch next week in relation to Vodafone and the ESB, which is a massive initiative, and I welcomed it when the legislation went through the Dáil and was very supportive of it. But we have to make sure that there's a fibre optic cable brought into every community. Every single person, whether they're in rural or urban Ireland, are now dependent on the internet, on telecommunications. It is the very same as the ESB in the 1950s or the telecoms in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. We have to ensure, because farmers, everybody else, small business people, we have all heard the stories in relation to GPs travelling 2 or 3 miles to make sure that they can send emails and make sure that they are spread. That is no longer acceptable, and we have to accept that a fibre optic cable is the only option, and not to be messing around with wasting money on other initiatives. It is simply not possible. I suppose in relation to communications, other issue in relation to communications, I think that it is high time that we had a serious look at, and that is in relation to the licence fee and how the broadcasting charge has now been shelved by the government, which I had said before Christmas to the Minister that it looked very much like some document that's being shelved. How that's being spent, and are we getting best value for money in it, and are we getting fair and balanced coverage in this House in relation to the national broadcaster? I think there's a major issue that we have to look at, and how that is being adjudicated on. Many things have been said recently in relation to the agriculture industry and how well that is going. The agriculture industry, the documents that were Brendan Smith brought out in July 2010 in relation to Food Harvest 2020, and that has been and is still the blueprint for Irish agriculture. It is vitally important, and if you look back at it, some people will say in this House, oh well, agriculture was never important during the Celtic Tiger and was ignored by successive governments. And that is clearly not the case. That is clearly not the case. I remember in 2007, in 1997, and trying to sort out the BSE crisis after we got back into government, and the major initiatives that were taken then by the late Minister Joe Welch in relation to the fundamental issues. And if you think back to the spring of 2001 on the foot and mouth disease, the entire nation and the entire government rode in to make sure that the Irish agriculture industry was protected, because it is clear that it is a massive industry. It was a massive industry at that time and is continuing to be a massive industry. And there was huge support put in relation to it. And indeed, in terms of the REPS 3, the REPS 1, 2, 3 and 4, those REPS payments and the initiatives that were put in, and of course the changing in 2004, 2005 to the single farm payment, and from all the coupled payments that were there was a major initiatives and major work done on it. And I think as well as that we have to acknowledge the massive work that farmers have done at the farm gate, because none of this we have one of the best products in the world. I mean, look at the percentage of infant formula that's used in the world that actually originates in this country. Look at the beef industry, look at the expansion in the dairy industry, but all of that has been done because the primary producer has worked extremely hard over the last 25, 30 years, right going back, but over the last 25 or 30 years, because there's been regulation after regulation piled upon them by the national government and by the European Commission to comply with it. But they all absolutely ponied up to this regulation. They all believe that if they were producing a quality product, there would be a market for it. There is a market for it, and they have produced a product. So I think that, whilst we can talk about the food industry and the excitement that's there and the opportunities that are there, let us not forget the farmer. And let us not accept that there has been a huge change in the cost base for the primary producer over the last number of years, and I think that we have to be very careful in it. There's one issue as well that I would like to raise in relation to the GLAS scheme. You know, the mechanisms that are there to apply for the GLAS scheme, to sign up to the GLAS scheme. The Department of Agriculture's website, or the Department of Agriculture's mechanism, does not accept farms that have two names, like John and Mary Murphy, or any other, if there are two brothers on the farm, if there are two husband and wife. Just because there are two names under the one herd number, there is no mechanism. And it is, as we face into the first week of May, and there's 2 weeks to go to application dates, it is not acceptable that we should be, and look, that this should be the case at this stage. I have contacted the Minister's office and I've contacted the department in relation to it, and I think that it should be something that in my own area, just in one of the towns that I represent, there's nearly 80 people in the same category at the moment, and I think it is absolutely not acceptable. I could go on in relation to agriculture and the concerns that are out there, the issues that are out there, the unavailability of credit to farmers, the persecution of people that may have gone into arrears in relation to loans and so forth. And you know, I'm dealing with banks on a daily and a weekly basis to try and resolve those issues. And indeed, there are some issues in relation to the revenue commissioners as well, when they are pursuing people for what is relatively small amounts of debt. And if I may, just on that, you know, we have the revenue commissioners at the moment going after people that, because of family circumstances, because of health issues, unexpected health issues, have had a debt with the department, with revenue. And I think forbearance should be forthcoming no more than within the banking sector. I think we have also, in relation to schools, the initiatives in relation to the pupil-teacher ratio, the maintenance of the small rural schools, and I think as a society, as I've spoken many times, as a society we should be evaluating and we should be looking at what is in rural communities rather than the current policy of pumping people into the large urban centres, which will have a detrimental effect on society as we go forward. Also, I know that there's a deputation in with the Minister for Transport this afternoon from the County Council, Cork County Council, the Northern Division, in relation to meeting with Minister Pascal Donohoe about the proposed road from Charleville, the N20 from Mallow and Charleville, where is that road at the moment? And I think that you know, that is hugely important for the development of the North Cork region, and I think that the indications are that it has been completely shelved, and I think that that we need to have movement on that. No more than the road from Macroom, the bypass in Macroom as well, that is certainly choking the area, and it is choking the town of Macroom, and many people have been putting down questions and seeking replies from the Minister in relation to it, because there are massive issues in relation to that, massive issues in relation to what should be you know, straightforward development and initiatives. But if I go back to the point I make in the minute or two left, you know, as we look at the spring statements, and we adjourn the Dáil in all but name for 3 days so that we can allow a congratulatory statement, not in our heyday would we contemplate having such a congratulatory 3 days. I think that there is so much business, so much real and important business to be discussed on the floor of Dáil Éireann or in the committees of Dáil Éireann that have been slowed down, have been stifled and haven't been brought forward by each and every government department, that it is sickening in this stream to talk about it. But I think if we look at the statements yesterday, particularly by Brendan Howlin in relation to a fair society, it is not fair. What is being proposed and what's being trotted out by this government is not a fair society. It is, by looking after the wealthy, we have seen the regressive budgets that have been brought in, and I think that anybody that could say, you know, if you look at the old mantra that they're saying about, you know, it's almost Thatcherite. It's almost Thatcherite in relation to it. And I think what we have to do is we have to look at how we're spending money. And going back to the second point that I raised in relation to the disability sector, we will be judged as a society. We will be judged in relation to how we look after these people. And the notion that a minister can come in and say that there is they have to look at the funding structures, or that we have to look at how that there's somehow duplication. There is no duplication, and I want to challenge it. In the minute I have left, there is no duplication. These groups are working flat out with these miserable amounts of money they're getting from the state to make sure that they're providing a service. If they were...
Thank you, Deputy.
I just want to make the point. I think it is sickening in the extreme that the Minister Harris alluded to it in some shape or form. It is not acceptable. These groups who are binding up deficits under Section 38 or Section 39, they have to be treated fairly, and even within the country they are not being treated because of the political clout that there is in some parts of the country as opposed to other parts of the country. And I think this government will be judged very harshly on how they are dealing with these issues.
Thank you, Deputy. I now